Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. We're really happy and excited to see all of you have devoted 1 hour of your time for our webinar. And we look forward to having this session with you. We hope that you get some learning. We hope that you find this engaging and insightful. I can already see around 55, 60 people have logged in. There are more people logging in, and that's always a good sign. I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Vikrant. I lead the marketing function at Inspire One. And the webinar today, what we're conducting is managing the emotional decibel. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Inspire One. We are a leading consulting firm that offers organizational and leadership development solutions. We have more than 2 decades of experience in the consulting domain, and some of the solutions that we offer in the market include leadership development, culture change, customer centricity, sales excellence, and productivity excellence. I'd like to talk a little bit about the rules of the house, or the way that you as participants can engage with us. As you could see, there is a questions tab that would be there on your screen. The attendees in this session are on mute, but we'd like you to talk to us and share your questions and doubt so that our speakers can answer your doubts. So please feel free to use this platform and share your questions with us. And we'll try our best to answer all the questions. In any case, if that we are not able to, we'll reach out to you personally with the answers to your doubts. The speakers today, our first speaker is Miss Hema Lakshmi Raju. She's a Chief Learning Officer at Reliance Industries, and she's a learning and leadership development expert. She's driven by a very strong passion to create a positive impact on individuals and organizations. She holds multi-sector experience and has worked for large business conglomerates such as Reliance Industries, Tata Motors, EID Parry, and Cipla. Our second speaker today is Ms. Neeta Mola. Neeta is a leadership and EI coach, a counselor, a consultant, and an author with a passion for L&D. Neeta has over 3 decades of experience, out of which almost 16 years has been in the area of designing and delivery of learning solutions for clients across industries in India. Neeta has also written a book on EI, which is titled Human Drama Inc., that explores EI at the workplace. With that introduction, I would now like to pass it on to Neeta, who would now be conducting this session and going ahead.
Thank you very much, Vikrant, and welcome, Hema. It is such a pleasure to have you today with us. So just for the audience, we have 4 objectives that we will be covering in the next almost an hour. We'll talk about the current context and the environment. We'll then look at how emotional health issues are playing out in organizations, and also some ideas and best practices about what organizations are doing to deal with this. There's a section on how do we manage our own emotional health, and we'll end with looking at how does this crisis also present certain opportunities for us, and how can we use these opportunities thereof. So with these 4 objectives, let's immediately start with understanding what is the context of mental health in India today. So the first survey was carried out by the Global Burden of Disease. In fact, the survey was carried out in 2017, and this predicted that depression will be the second leading cause of disability worldwide in 2020. I think this is pretty much true. I'm sure they didn't know about the pandemic at that point of time. The second survey, which is carried out by WHO, says that there will be a maximum number of people suffering from depression in India, which will be followed by China and then the US. This is not surprising considering the population. So yes, we are in India for a lot of people getting affected by depression. One of the news or I would say not such good news, is that mental health issues are affecting people at much younger ages than they were in the earlier times. So we see mental health issues now coming up at ages almost 13, 14, and that is something that is definitely alarming. Let's move on to what's happening in current times, COVID times. So there's a 20% increase in mental health concerns. And actually, the news is, or the thought is, that this is not going to go away even after COVID. It's only going to increase or going to really exacerbate. And 30% of professionals are complaining about emotional issues, and a lot also complaining about some sort of depression. This is not surprising, again, because there's loss of employment, there's isolation. As of now, or as of today, there's still little bleak news about coronavirus. There is fear, there is helplessness, and people are really stressed out. The main causes of stress in job, or this emotional issue at workplace, is coming from too much of stress in job and work-life balances, which seem to have gone haywire. Added to this, the World Economic Forum actually called the worldwide lockdown as the largest psychological experiment ever. And the impact of depression, anxiety, and even substance abuse is going to last for many more years to come. So all in all, it seems to be that mental health is something that we should be aware of, we should know of, we should discuss, and we should talk about. Therefore, we called it the emotional decibel, because the good news in all of this is that, yes, we are all talking about the emotions, and I'm sure that once we talk about it, we will also learn how to handle and manage it. So that's the context, and I think in this context, we hope that this will be relevant for everybody attending this webinar. So I'll turn it over to Hema. So Hema, we talked about the big picture and how emotional health is sort of entering all stages of life and all people in life. How do you see the mental health, not mental health so much, but emotional health issues manifesting in organizations and in the lives of people? How do you see it in the organizations?
So hi, Nita. I'm very happy to be here. Wellness overall and emotional wellness in particular is a topic of great interest for me. So happy to be sharing my thoughts here.
Thank you.
The statistics, the data that you presented was quite alarming. But at another level, not very surprising, though, because we have been hearing this for some time now. Mental health issues being on the rise across age groups is a trend that we have been seeing. And the current crisis has only catapulted it many times. The current crisis has catapulted many other things like digital transformation. Along with that, mental emotional health is an issue which has gotten worse because of this. Now, we spoke a lot about stress, be it at the work front or at the personal front. Stress has become a constant companion over the last few months. Now, taking a step back and looking at this crisis, this is not new information. We have heard it multiple times. This is not just one crisis. This is multiple crises that's been bundled together into one and thrown at us all together. So every possible front has been disrupted. It's a work front, it's a personal front, it's a social front. Every possible front has been disrupted. And we know very well that any kind of change takes a lot of effort. So, as trainers, as experts in the domain of behavior change, we talk about how it takes at least 21 days for a new behavior, new habit to get established. But here was a situation wherein overnight we had to change multiple behaviors. It's not just one, we had to change multiple behaviors. Reasonable amount of change leads to a certain amount of stretch, but when that level exceeds, it leads to stress is what we see is happening in the current time. So there is huge amounts of stress that all of us are going through. And the imbalance that you spoke about, there's a work-life imbalance, and I would extend it a little more. It is not just work-life imbalance, there's again imbalance of every possible kind. For instance, if you look at me time versus family time, there's an imbalance about it. All of us are craving for some more me time. Boundaries of every kind have gone away because in the same house, maybe in the same room, we have spouses doing their office work at the same time. There's a child attending virtual classes all at the same time. So boundaries of every kind have dissolved, leading to, in a way, a sense of loss of power, loss of control, which also, aggravates the stress further. Another bit that I'm also wanting to talk about, we have jumped into this new way of not just working, new way of living, shown extremely high levels of adaptability, extremely high levels of agility in adjusting to this new way of life. But recently, I was asking myself, have we really recalibrated multiple things as needed to adjust to this new way of life? So what am I talking about it? In this new way of life, what needs to change? What needs to stop? We have started a whole lot of things, but what needs to stop? And this insight came upon me a couple of days back, because if you look at older times, weekends, Saturdays, Sundays meant doubling up my workout time. If I would otherwise, and I'm extremely passionate about my workouts. So if on other days I'm working out for 45 minutes, weekends would mean I do it for more than an hour. I continue doing that. And today's reality is also that there's no domestic help. We end up doing all the work, and weekends also mean there's deep cleaning happening. There's extra work at the household front as well. So doing both, I realized I was getting extremely exhausted. And I said, I need to take a step back and ask myself, what should I stop? I've started multiple things afresh, but what should I stop? If I'm not going to do that, there is a huge amount of fatigue which is going to set in. And that's a piece which I keep hearing from colleagues a lot. There's a lot of fatigue because there's too much of, and fatigue, be it physical fatigue or mental fatigue. So fatigue is another piece. And again, all of this, be it, the boundaries disappearing, fatigue, all of this also add on to the mental stress that we keep talking about. The last bit that I'm wanting to highlight here is about leadership stress. Everyone, every single employee is going through stress. And I keep mentioning COVID as an extremely big equalizer, because it has not spared anyone. All of us are as vulnerable as anyone else. So while everyone is going through this stress, the responsibilities on leadership, at one level, we need to take care of people. Safety of our people is of utmost importance. We need to ensure business continuity, because without that, livelihoods are going to be impacted. And how do I also gear up my organization to face the future? So this is a big ask. So in the process of doing all of it, and leaders across have been doing a fabulous job about it, but in the process of doing all of it, there's extremely high levels of stress that leaders are going through. So we need to take a step back and think about what about especially leadership replenishment, leadership rejuvenation. So these are some pieces that I wanted to highlight at this point, Nita.
Yeah, I think very, very pertinent, and I think that, we're talking about this. I really do believe that this decade, we're talking about the 2020 to 2030, is a time where we all will have to really learn how to deal with mental health and emotional health issues. So we've learned how to deal with, our physical part of what we need to do. We've also learned a little bit more about how do we relax or meditate or things like that. But overall, how do we deal with emotions is going to become very important, because this level of stress in a continued way is not something that, I guess we've ever faced this way, the way that we have in such a global way. And so well, as you put it, that, in such an equal way. So there's in a way, panic across the world and anxiety levels really rising across the world as well. So we'll just take a pause at this point and just, see if there's any question that is coming in, because like Vikrant had said earlier, we encourage everybody to put their questions up to us as we go along. So I'm just, looking at, are there any questions coming up from the audience? So one question, Hema, that is showing up is that, of course, you've talked about many things which are really different. So the stress levels are far more than what they were. The leadership ask is far more than what was the case. The fatigue levels seem to be much higher. The boundaries seem to have gone, and the demand on changing behaviors has really come, like a lot and all of a sudden. So how is this manifesting? How do you see it in terms of behaviors at workplace? So for example, do you see people, sort of getting shot a little bit more? Or how do you see these manifesting? How are they showing up at workplaces?
If you look at behaviors at the workplace, yes, definitely there's a lot of talk about stress. Okay, and I do not see work deliverables getting impacted in a big way, but there's definitely, people are talking a lot about stress, and across organizations, a piece that we keep hearing is that the day never seems to end.
Right.
It begins at a certain time, but when does it end? Nobody knows. There are no weekends. So all of it also leading to a certain amount of fatigue. But also on the other side, when we're talking about emotions, it's not all negative always. There is also a lot of positive emotions as well that I keep seeing. There's a lot of curiosity about trying out new things, because across functions, across domains, it has changed a lot, either in what we are doing or how we are doing it.
Right.
So
right.
that newness is also giving rise to a certain sense of excitement. I saw that especially in the initial months. But what is a matter of concern? Again, I would go back to the point on stress. And it is also about multiple emotions showing up. See, earlier it used to be that, yes, I'm angry, and, emotions are very much interrelated. If I'm angry, I also get irritated. There can be a sense of worry. But here, it's also about multiple emotions, playing in a day that is all bundled together again. There's worry, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's anger, there is irritation. So multiple elements that are bundled together.
Right. That's extremely interesting. We can take this up later, because the good news, of course, is that it's not only all negative, but it is also across emotions, and definitely this, what we call the emotional strain, is quite high. And as of now, it's not showing up in the productivity or in the output, which means that there is far more pressure on people to perform. But it's something that needs to be taken care of. And what I really liked about what you said earlier was that from a leadership standpoint, this whole thing of making it more safe and focusing on some of these issues is also something that leadership is concerned about. And so thank you for that, Hema. We'll just move on. I have this question also to ask of you, because you'll be the best person to tell us. So you gave us some instances of what is happening at the leadership level, but what are you seeing as some good practices across organizations that are new or different, or have been perked up during this time?
Right. The focus on wellness overall has gone up manyfold, and that's an extremely heartening thing. So be it physical wellness, mental wellness, emotional wellness, the organization's focus on wellness has gotten really dialed up. So across sectors, across organizations, people first has become a very, very strong belief and philosophy. How do we ensure physical well-being of our people? How do we ensure it's not just employees, but also their families, which is something that my organization is focusing on very, very heavily. It's about all kinds of stakeholders, employees, families, other stakeholders that we are looking at. How do we ensure the physical well-being is taken care of? So it's not just about advisories and communication on physical wellness, but also slightly more tangible things. For instance, in my organization, we introduced a symptom checker that employees and families are taking on a daily basis to find out if they are at high risk for the infection. Mm-hmm. So on a daily basis, I get to know whether I'm at low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And if we are found to be at medium risk or high risk, there is immediate intervention that happens. Okay. Also, when it comes to mental wellness, the kind of focus on that, educating people on that is a big focus area which organizations are looking at. So in our case, we started with educating people with respect to skills for crisis management, even in the first week of work from home. So what are the simple things, be it resilience, be it agility, be it adaptability? How is it that you can develop these skills? And we did not look at long duration sessions, but micro modules which trigger insights for people. And we also followed it up with slightly longer sessions, wherein a lot of inputs, insights around, first, let me acknowledge that, yes, this is stressful times, this is not normal times. Let me acknowledge that, and here are some things that I can be doing to stay fit at this point of time, physically fit, mentally fit. So those are some pieces that I wanted to highlight, Nita.
Right. Thank you, Hema.
Hi. So Nita, you've been asking me a lot of questions. I want to bounce off one question to you. At an individual or personal level, what do you think people could be doing to manage themselves better, to address this crisis and manage themselves better?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where, let's say, normal people have been exposed to extraordinary situation, and really it has, like what you said, it has impacted just everybody. So whether it is people feeling lonely or isolated because they've been locked down or away from their families, or anxious or stressed, or in a situation like a pressure cooker, like what you talked about, families being together and boundaries not being there, or even people who've been in the front line, or the COVID warriors facing burnout. So, of course, it is a situation that is, a very severe situation in many ways. And severe situations really call for quite a number of things that people can do to take care of themselves, starting with what you mentioned, Hema, becoming aware, knowing that they should do this. Because, again, emotional health, we somehow take for granted. We are more concerned about things like physical health, but the emotional health we actually don't really focus on. So I'm just going to talk through a few things. What does managing self really mean? And I would just take it in three levels. The first is building self-awareness. And that, I think, is the starting point and the key point, because if that was to happen, everything else sort of falls in place. The second is, like you mentioned, about resilience, and you mentioned about stress management. So definitely about managing self, which is managing stress. But here we also want to talk a little bit about managing emotions. And the third is managing emotions so that they work for us and not against us, which is also our ability to be able to access more positive emotions and be more self-driven or self-motivated, so that we have the energy to cope with this crisis. So I'm just going to take this up at three levels and just walk through a few points that I have put together. So the first one, when we talk about building self-awareness, we're talking about knowing ourselves. And what we know ourselves well, or the areas that we know ourselves well, is still at a level of, let's say, our body or our mind, our thoughts. But when we talk about emotions, people are still very stuck. They're not able to even distinguish between what is a thought and what is an emotion. And why that's very important to do is because emotions are the deeper source of the way we think and we act and we behave. So we are not aware of our emotions. There's very little we can do to regulate it. There's very little that we can do to manage it in an effective way before it sort of becomes, larger than life. So the first thing is to learn and distinguish between what is a thought and what is a feeling and what is the difference. One of the easy ways of doing it, and of course in this webinar we can't talk about everything, but one of the easy ways of doing it is to know that feelings have a physical manifestations in the body. So for example, excessive dryness of throat, or clammy hands, or flutter in the stomach, or sometimes a dull headache, or an increased heart rate, or quickening of a pulse, or low energy, or inability to sleep or have excessive sleep. These are some symptoms. I'll just take an example. I was talking to somebody who's 60 years of age, and all of a sudden she, has developed this high blood pressure out of nowhere. And then she complains, she's been complaining of this dull headache, and she's been really running from pillar to post. Of course, her blood pressure needed to get under control. But a lot of this is because of emotions which have got somatized in the body. And, something that, because she was not aware of earlier, she had no idea that these are emotions that need to be understood and emotions that need to be recognized, and be figured out, so that we can do something about it. So I would say that a starting point of becoming self-aware is to know two things: that thoughts and emotions are two different things. Emotions and feelings come from the deeper recesses of our brain, usually show up as physical manifestations. And if we become aware of these emotions and become aware of these physical manifestations, then this provides us as a guide, as a resource of being able to take care of ourselves. So that is broadly about being self-aware and being able to sort of call out a range of feelings, not just I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad, but be able to be more specific in terms of, is it irritability? Is it frustration? Is it rage? Is it anger? What is it? And like you mentioned, very often it is a combination. So having the ability to call it out is the first step. The second,
If I can, I'm sorry about interrupting, but can I add on my 2 cents here?
please, thank you so
Okay.
much.
So very, very powerful. Thanks for bringing it up. Building self-awareness is so very foundational. And as you said, that's something which we often find lacking in people. I think I know about myself, but actually I don't. I know something about myself, but not everything. So it's something that I don't know that I don't know. Okay, and that differentiation between thought and feeling again is very, very interesting. Because one of the most difficult questions for somebody to answer is, how are you feeling? And the response that we get is, I'm feeling good. And then you'll have to tell them, good is not a feeling. Can you talk about your feelings?
Right.
And so, extremely powerful. Thanks for sharing that.
Right. Yeah. And it's just very often we say teach people the emotional language. Because again, if I was just to make a comparison with any illness, it's about being able to first of all, know about that illness, know where it's affecting, impacting, and then only you can do something to manage it. Otherwise, it's like you're walking around in the dark. You don't know what's happening and why is it happening. And usually then it's showing up much later in life, like the example of the 60-year-old person I just mentioned. So thanks for adding on, Hema, and please feel free to keep adding. That will be really helpful for everyone. So the second step of managing self, which is managing our thoughts and emotions, is really making that distinction firstly about what is that emotions. For example, if it's anger, it's handled a little differently than if it is fear and if it is sorrow. So once we are made able to make that distinction between what exactly is the feeling and how is it, how am I experiencing it in my body as a physical manifestation, then a good question to ask is that, what is this feeling pointing towards? What is it telling me? Because it's like we say, a thought is a resource that helps us to make a decision, helps us to think logically. So also feeling is a resource which tells us or gives us some information about something that, there is some balance which has gone off, and therefore the feeling, and therefore where is it directing us? So asking the question that, what information is this feeling giving us? So let me take an example just to make this point. So for example, in the current situation, if there is recurring anxiety because of the fear of losing a job or reduced income, and you know that, okay, look, every day on an everyday basis, you're experiencing this flutter in the stomach and it's only growing. So that gives an indication that perhaps this is anxiety. And if this is anxiety, then by asking this question, what is it? So of course, it's increased anxiety. So what can I do? And then a person can sort of think about number of actions they can take, which is maybe things like even reducing expenses, or maybe learning new skills, or making oneself more relevant, or planning an alternative career, or multiple innovative ways of even enhancing income. But all these solutions will only happen if we listen to our feeling and we are able to act on this feeling before it becomes too much, too big, because then the feeling sort of takes over. And when the feeling hijacks the brain, then the way the brain responds to that is it narrows down thinking even further and goes into a little bit of a defensive mode. So it is important to catch the feeling early and then figure out what is this feeling, and then handling the feeling per se. So for example, if it's anxiety is usually caused when we are thinking excessively. So, calming down and saying, where is the evidence? And then being able to say, all right, I've calmed myself down, but now what can I do about the situation? Because part of it is real. The anxiety is coming out of something which is real. So if I was to just summarize this, it is about acknowledging or recognizing the feeling, labeling it, very important. It is fear or it is frustration. It is then understanding it, expressing it if it's needed, or acting upon it. So that's the summary of being able to work with our feelings, being able to manage the feelings. And just a quick understanding of this biologically, because today, thanks to neuroscience and otherwise, there's so much understanding of what's happening in the brain. So one of the problems with managing feelings is that it is kind of rooted in our, self-regulation is rooted in our biology. What do I mean by that? So our emotional centers in the brain were created to take care of great dangers. So it's really coming from the cave times when we needed to run away if we found a leopard, and that threat response helped us to really act. But because this is really rooted in our biology, very often even minor threats, so a raised voice by a boss, we sort of react in the same way. So what we really need to understand in all of this is that there is a threat-focused response, which is like a default response that our brain sort of provides. But we need to go a little bit beyond that. That is something that is there in our rudimentary brain. But as our brains have evolved, we also can access what is called an achieving and activating network in our brain, and also the affiliated focused network in our brain. And when we access these networks, the good news is that, instead of having, so the threat focus produces adrenaline, cortisol, all these kinds of neurotransmitters and hormones, which in a way create problems for us most, in our body by suppressing the immune system, impacting the vasospasms in our vascular system, etc. And they don't help us to think in a very expanded or creative way. Whereas if we focus on the other two systems, which we can do, we are able to then release, the happy hormones, whether these are dopamine or whether these are serotonin or whether these are oxytocins. And this helps us then to be more creative in our actions. So what do we mean when we say focus on achieving and activating things? It is about sometimes looking at small things that can give us quick results, and especially in times of stress. So, there so many people, I mean, even if we talk about this pandemic, there have been a lot of cases and a lot of situations where people have been very creative. They've come up with good things to do in the house. They've come up with good things to do in their families and so on. So that's one lot of people. And there are also people who felt the strain of this immensely. And, they feel they're like, when will this get over? And actually, I don't know when it'll ever get over and go back to normal, probably never. But there are these two extremes where some people have responded with high levels of stress and become, there's violence at home and so many stories like that. And at the other hand, there are people who are saying, oh, I love this because it has got me to focus on things that are so important. And, I'm enjoying and reprioritizing and so on. So, and most of us are somewhere in between. So the point that I'm making is that today there is a lot of evidence that we can do things to manage ourselves better, to be more creative and productive even in extreme stresses, and learning to do that is really the opportunity. The final bit that I'm going to talk about is self-motivation, because again, while we manage our feelings, and that's great, what is also very important is to stay healthy, stay positive, and ensure that we have these positive and happy hormones in our system that help us to take the right kind of action. And at a very simple level, what this means is we've talked about it in the last bit, setting personal goals. So when people say that this is a good opportunity for me to reprioritize, this is what it means to set personal goals. And I was reading some Harvard's research, which is a very, very lengthy research over years. And the strange thing that comes out of that research is we spend most of our time on things that don't make us happy, including creation of wealth. So of course we need wealth. We need some amount of wealth to be happy, but then that over focus on it is not making us happy at all. So what is it that is really going to make us happy, which is our personal goals, and setting those personal goals can be very, very motivating and, helping us to stay on track and things which are meaningful. Again, we talk about the other thing that this research really talked about is how having healthy and meaningful relationships is the biggest way of being self-motivated and happy. And that's why people who've gone back to relationships or, spending time together in a happy way have looked at this opportunity as something which has been very gratifying and motivating and so on. So, and of course, there are many things that people talk about, including gratitude, including practicing compassion, because again, compassion, our brains are really socially wired. And the more we give, the more we get. So these are some practices that help us to be self-motivated, something that we really need in times of crisis and in times where, our emotional health is fragile. So I'll just very quickly go over these tips. It's just saying that restore breathing, because breathing, of course, our breathing becomes very shallow in times of stress. Question your perspective, especially when we're talking about anxiety. Listen to yourself, listen to feelings, disconnect, and then don't try and take on other people's emotions at this point of time. Take care of yourself. So we'll again just pause for a minute to look at any audience questions. So before we go to the last part. So I see a question here which is saying that, despite doing all of this, what if there is still high levels of stress and anxiety? And I really believe this is very important to address, because what I'd really like to say is that it is okay not to be okay, and to acknowledge that rather than try and be okay all the time when we are not feeling okay. It is an unusual situation. It is a situation, and at any time, it's not just this situation, when we feel our emotional health is at stake, it is very intelligent to seek support and seek help. There is a term called comparative suffering. And what this really means is that I discount my suffering because I sort of feel that everyone else is also suffering. So, I'll say, oh, okay, so I only had to take a 10% cut. I should be feeling okay about it, although I'm not. Because everybody else, there are people who've had to take 50% cut, or even some people have had to lose their job. So I sort of, make myself feel okay about my suffering, whereas internally I may not feel okay at all. But this comparative suffering, as this term is called, masks the real emotions. And for a while it may be okay, but these emotions come up and, hit in a very big way. So the point that I'm making here is that, if you feel that it's any feeling, if it's anxiety or fear or worry or even sadness is going on for a long time, and you're doing everything that you can to handle and manage it, please do seek support. It's found world over that people don't seek as much support as they need to, and that would really be important. I think Hema made a very good point that organizations are also, looking out for creating these structures where people can seek help. So, with that in place and with people seeking help, I think it's an important thing to really consider. Is there anything you'd like to add, Hema, before we go into the last bit?
Sure. Just a quick point from my side, Nita. One is about, you mentioned about reaching out to seek support. I would also say that we should reach out to offer support. It can be that I'm going through the stress. I need to, if I'm not able to handle it despite all that I'm doing, can I talk to the right person? And I also know that there are multiple organizations, including my own, which offers counseling support to people. They can reach out for counseling service as well. But as colleagues, it need not just be from manager to team member, but even amongst peers, can we reach out? If we find that somebody, is not sounding all that okay in the virtual meetings that we're attending, or has gone very silent, or any such signals that you're picking up, can you reach out? Or even otherwise, even if you're not picking up signals, on a regular basis, can we keep talking to each other because we're not able to see each other? Can we keep talking to each other and be there to offer support? Reaching out to offer support to me is also very important.
Hey, Maiti, thank you so much for that. I so agree with that. I think that we talked about compassion, and compassion, of course, is, sort of feeling the other person's feeling also in a way, and doing something about it. It goes a little bit beyond empathy. And I think that offering support is a real example of that, is a real way of acting upon compassion. So totally agree that, of course, there will be people who are trained to do it, and it's very important to reach out when that situation arises. But also this awareness that we all will need support, and if we can sort of be more compassionate to each other, it helps everybody. It helps the other, it also helps us. So very, very valid and pertinent point. So I'm going to just move on to the last part of this webinar. And Hema, I'll address this to you, that, we do know that crisis always brings opportunity and, change. And in fact, if I was just to quote Einstein, he said, in the midst of every crisis lies an opportunity. So from an organization standpoint, from your own standpoint, what opportunities do you see? Because that helps us also to move into a more positive direction rather than just be consumed by, what is happening.
True, Nita. This crisis definitely has offered multiple opportunities to many of us, be it at an individual level or at an organizational level. To begin with, it has stretched us so much that a resilience quotient has really gone up. Resilience is often quoted as one of the future skills. If you look at multiple studies over the last couple of years, they keep talking about a set of behavioral skills which should become very, very important in times to come. Not that this did not exist in the past, but the criticality of it, it is going to be extremely high as we move ahead, as the world becomes more and more VUCA. The importance of these skills is going to be that much more important. So be it resilience, be it adaptability, be it agility. This crisis has given a huge opportunity for us to display it and practice it. And I keep saying that we didn't have to go through a master class or a learning journey to master these skills. It happened overnight through sheer experience. We were pushed into it. So extremely high levels of adaptability in a matter of a couple of hours, in a day or two. All of us so beautifully got used to working from home, leveraging the tools that were there. Or multiple other changes, as I spoke about a while back. The extent of adaptability that we have developed through this crisis, the speed and agility that we have developed has been phenomenal. In addition to many other things that it has catapulted, it has also catapulted capability building.
Right.
So that's one part. Second, there's a huge amount of what I would call as process re-engineering which has happened. Every function across the value chain might have wanted to drive certain change, certain transformation in the way it does business. And this crisis has given an opportunity to drive it with a lot of speed. For instance, if I have to talk about my own domain, learning and development, I strongly believe that in the context of continuous learning and lifelong learning, which we keep talking about, learning is something which needs to be owned by the individual. The learning team, learning and development professionals can be at the periphery, supporting, guiding, facilitating. But the primary ownership for my capability building lies with me. And I've been saying this for some time now, and suddenly, as if by magic, uh, it's enabled it. It's made it possible. People are realizing the joy of learning on their own, going to be digital tools or through other means and mechanisms. So suddenly, you see that transformation having happened without much of an effort. So similarly, across multiple other functions, the process changes which have happened, which is for the good. So that's another big opportunity that the crisis has thrown. And also coupled with that is the speed with which things are happening. The agility quotient of organizations and individuals has gone up many, many times. What would have otherwise taken weeks and months, we see it happening in a matter of days. So the speed, what is my potential for speed is something that we're discussing.
Right.
The last bit is also about, we've been talking a lot about empathy and compassion. And I think this crisis has really touched that soft spot within all of us. So we keep hearing a lot about compassionate leadership, empathetic leadership, and it's not just about preaching, we see it being practiced at all levels. So that wonderful balance between task focus and relationship focus that we have been talking about for a very long time, I think that balance somewhere has fallen in place in this crisis. We see leaders being extremely empathetic towards their teams, reaching out to them, trying to understand their situation and offering support, but at the same time being able to focus on the task to be delivered, ensuring execution happens, operations happen. So somewhere that balance between compassion, empathy, and results, it's about driving results with empathy is how I would put it. We see it happening in a very beautiful way.
Thank you so much, Hema, for what you just said. In so many ways, this sounds like a dream come true. We've spent so many years trying to educate people as to how to sort of implement change or how to act on being resilient or being agile. We've spent so long in terms of teaching people the value of being empathic leaders, and it seems like it's all happening now. So this pandemic, in many ways, has forced some positive changes, which is really good to know. At a personal level, also, when we look at people who've gone through this change in a more adaptive way, in a happier way, we find that they are practicing what is called congruence. So this idea of congruence is really when one's personal values, actions, work, environment, all the important elements of life come together in a very meaningful way. And in fact, this is a study that a lot of behavioral scientists are looking at and seeing that the benefit of this and how this causes deep happiness. So this also forces us to look at, for example, what is important, what is not important, what is essential, and helps us to embrace the things that are important and critical, and helps us also to focus on this. Similarly, making ourselves secure against insecurity, because we do know that this is not the only incident or the only pandemic which is going to cause us so much disruption. Disruption is going to be the way of life. So if we have to prepare ourselves for insecurity in the future, how do we do that? How do we secure ourselves? How do we make certain things stable within us? So whether these are skills, and skills of resilience, of course, is one of the key ones, because it will help us in any volatile environment, or this whole attitude of learning, because we know that we will always have to look at new skills. We'll always have to be what is called irreplaceable. So gearing ourselves to learning is always going to be what is important. And of course, small things like, for example, in this situation, how do we spend more strategically? How do we manage our resources in a more strategic way, and things like that? So really, if we look at it, this crisis has given us an opportunity to learn multiple things, and specifically to learn how to change, how to innovate, how to look at collaboration in a new and a different and in a more effective way. So that's really great, and we hope that these opportunities will enable all of us to be more effective in times going ahead. So in summary, what are the key points that we've discussed? The first is that mental and emotional health issues are on the rise. Second important thing is that people are facing high levels of disruption and stress. But the good news is that the individuals or the organizations and the society today are more cognizant and supportive of the emotional issues. They're talking about it much more, they're aware of it much more. As Hema mentioned, organizations are taking positive actions both at the structure level and at the leadership level to support this unprecedented change. Stemming from here, individuals will need new skills and skills of resilience, adaptability, agility, self-management, and self-motivation are skills that we can learn which will help us in any crisis. Also, the good news is that today there is a combination of research, tools, and expertise available to support individuals and organizations alike with any emotional health issues. And it is prudent to seek this help. Opportunities for human-centered and people-first approaches present themselves today to ensure that there is better innovation, collaboration, and change. So all in all, yes, it's a crisis, it's a difficult time, but there is also great opportunity and great impetus to really become better in all aspects of life. So I'm going to end this webinar by talking about the Stocktale Paradox. Some of you may be familiar with it. This paradox refers to James Stockdale, who was the former vice presidential candidate, a naval officer, and a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War. And he was a prisoner of war for as long as 8 years. And one of his biggest learnings, which is something which is so important in today's context, was that especially when you face a crisis, you face something which is very dire, what is very important to remember is to manage this paradox of looking at brutal facts of your current reality, squarely in the face, whatever they may be, but also having the faith that you will prevail in the end. So both these things are really important when we face any crisis. Not to deny what is happening, so facing those brutal facts, but also living with hope and optimism. And this, I hope, will be a great inspiration for all of us to take forward. And of course, as Dalai Lama says, it is worth remembering that the time of greatest gain in terms of wisdom and inner strength is often that of the greatest difficulty. So with that, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Hema, for being here. You've added so much value in this webinar. Thank you very much for that. And we hope that this has been helpful. What we'll do now is look at questions, if there are any, from the audience. Whatever we cannot address, we will come back to you with answers for.
So I'm just looking at the chat box, and while there are a few questions, I'm also looking at the time, and I'm cognizant of the fact that, a lot of you have spent this entire hour. So I'll possibly take one question from the questions that have come, and with the promise that we will address all the other questions to the individuals who have asked them separately through a mail. So this question reads that, I'm an L&D manager, and one of my challenges in working remotely has been to keep the teams engaged and to make sure that people are positively inclined and have positive emotions so that they can, go through the stress. So what could be some of the tips, or what could be some of the things that I could keep in mind, basically to ensure that people feel positive, feel happy, feel engaged? So yes, it is, I think, from an organization point of view, difficult. We are not seeing each other, we are not meeting each other, there's less of interaction and human contact. And some of the things I think we have covered in this particular webinar, for example, reaching out to each other. Hema covered that point very beautifully, that it is important to keep reaching out to each other, especially if we see someone being a little bit quiet, let's say in a meeting. It is important to reach out to each other, not only with respect to work, but in general, And I think from an L&D perspective and from an organization perspective, keeping certain time where you're still celebrating things or you're still doing fun things together is another good practice in these times, because people look forward to it. So I've observed that in a lot of organizations, they keep some time, let's say on a Friday evening, where again, there is information exchanged and people sort of talk about what they've done well or where they've struggled or whatever it is that people want to share. So making those kind of structures possible for people to share what they are doing, making it possible for people to celebrate success is another way of ensuring that there is engagement. And I think communication, of course, whenever communication breaks down, people start feeling disengaged. But uh, keeping communication going in these difficult times can be a very important aspect of making sure that people are sort of keeping in touch with each other. Uh, I think organizationally, also, when you look at certain projects, like how does an organization gear itself to reach out, let's say to lesser to parts of society where they may need that help. uh, I think all those efforts will go a long way in ensuring that people feel good about themselves. So I'm just going to wrap this up. Over to you, Vikrant. Is But thank you all very much once again for being a part of this webinar.
Thank you, Neeta, and thanks, Hema, for being part of our session. I'm sure all our attendees found it very insightful, and we hope we added some value in this very important topic right now. I just wanted to share some bit for information in terms of follow-up. We would be sharing the deck of this webinar, the presentation deck of the webinar, with all the attendees and the ones who couldn't attend as well. We'll also be sharing the webinar recording with everyone. So we look forward to your feedback, and we're really happy that all of you could spend some time with us today. And thanks a lot, and we hope you have a great day ahead.